A mother should never have to decide which bill gets paid and which part of her body has to wait. Emily Carter heard that sentence in her head before she ever said it aloud, standing under the fluorescent lights of Miller's Pharmacy with a prescription bottle in one hand and her phone in the other. The bottle was small, almost insultingly small, white plastic with an orange cap, the kind of ordinary thing people tossed into purses without thinking. But the price on the register screen might as well have been carved into stone. $187.46. Her checking account had $212 until Friday, and Friday was still 3 long days away. On her phone, a message from Mrs. Helen Brooks, her landlord, glowed like a warning flare. Emily, I need rent by Thursday at 5 p.m. I have been patient, but I cannot keep waiting. Thursday at 5 p.m. That was 48 hours from now. 48 hours between a roof over Noah's head and another humiliating conversation in a hallway that always smelled faintly of old carpet, fried onions, and somebody else's cigarette smoke. Emily swallowed, but her throat felt dry. The pharmacist, a tired man with kind eyes behind square glasses, looked at her with the careful expression people used when they already knew the answer would hurt. Do you want to run it through insurance again? He asked gently. Sometimes the system glitches. Emily almost laughed. Systems did glitch, but somehow never in favor of women like her. Not for single mothers working 2 jobs. Not for people who counted quarters in the cup holder of a 12-year-old Honda Civic. Not for anyone who had ever stood in a pharmacy doing math with their own health. No, she said, forcing her voice steady. It's okay. I'll come back tomorrow. The lie slipped out smoothly, polished by practice. She had become good at promising tomorrow things that today could not afford. The pharmacist hesitated. Emily, this isn't the kind of medication you should skip. She nodded as if she understood, because she did understand. That was the worst part. She understood the risks. She understood the tightness in her chest that came, and went like a hand closing slowly around her lungs. She understood the dizzy spells, the trembling fingers, the way her body had started sending small warnings she kept filing away under later. But Noah's sneakers were already too tight. The electric bill was past due. The rent was not a suggestion. A body could be negotiated with, at least for a little while. A landlord could not. Behind her, the automatic doors sighed open, letting in a rush of cold Ohio air and the faint smell of rain on pavement. Emily turned just enough to see Thomas Whitaker step inside. The quiet man from apartment 2B, his gray wool coat buttoned to the throat, his white hair damp at the edges. He carried himself like someone who had spent most of his life leaving rooms before conversations became personal. He nodded once, polite but distant, then stopped when his eyes moved from the prescription bottle to the phone in her hand. Emily turned back quickly, cheeks warming. There was a particular shame in being witnessed at the exact moment you could not afford yourself. She placed the medication on the counter, sliding it back with 2 fingers as if distance could make the decision less cruel. I'm sorry, she whispered, though she was not sure whether she was apologizing to the pharmacist, to herself, or to the small boy waiting at home who still believed mothers could fix anything. She paid for a pack of children's cough drops Noah liked, even though he was not sick, because bringing something home made the empty-handedness feel less obvious. Then she stepped outside into the gray afternoon, pulling her thin cardigan tight beneath her coat. Across the parking lot, cars hissed over wet asphalt. Somewhere behind her, the pharmacy bell chimed again, and Thomas Whitaker's low voice murmured at the counter. Emily did not look back. She could not bear the possibility that he had seen too much. In her purse, her phone buzzed again with another rent reminder. In her chest, the familiar pressure returned, quiet and patient. She pressed a hand against it and walked faster toward her car, telling herself she had made the responsible choice. She had chosen shelter. She had chosen Noah. She had chosen one more month of keeping the world from reaching their front door. What she did not know was that the quiet neighbor behind her had seen the bottle, seen the message, heard the tremor she tried to hide, and for the first time in years, Thomas Whitaker was about to break the one rule he had built his lonely life around. Do not get involved. The apartment smelled faintly of tomato soup, laundry detergent, and the lemon-scented cleaner Emily used when she wanted the place to feel less tired than it was. Apartment 3C had beige walls, one window that faced the parking lot, and a radiator that clanged at night like it was trying to escape. Still, When Emily unlocked the door and saw Noah sitting cross-legged at the thrift store coffee table with his spelling homework spread around him, she felt the familiar ache of gratitude. It was small, but it was theirs. "Hey, Bug," she said, forcing brightness into her voice as she hung her damp coat on the back of a kitchen chair. Noah looked up immediately. At 8 years old, he had his father's dark blonde hair, but none of Ryan Carter's careless charm. Noah watched people carefully, the way children do when they have learned that adults often say one thing and mean another. His eyes moved to the pharmacy bag in her hand. "Did you get your medicine?" Emily set the bag on the counter and turned toward the sink so he would not see her face too clearly. "They had to order part of it. I will pick it up tomorrow." The lie landed between them with a soft, ugly weight. Noah did not challenge it. That was what hurt most. A child should argue about bedtime or vegetables, not silently decide whether his mother was telling the truth about being sick. "I saved you some crackers," he said, pushing a paper napkin toward the empty chair beside him. 3 saltines sat there, arranged in a careful little stack. Emily pressed her lips together and walked over to kiss the top of his head. His hair smelled like school hallway, pencil shavings, and the cheap apple shampoo he insisted was not for babies. "Thank you," she whispered. On the kitchen counter, her phone buzzed again. She did not need to look to know it was another message she could not answer, because adulthood, apparently, was just a collection of people asking for money in different fonts. She turned the screen face down and opened the refrigerator. Half a gallon of milk, 2 eggs, a plastic container of leftover pasta, and a bag of carrots. Enough, if she stretched it. Enough had become a talent. Enough had become a language. "Mrs. Keller said I can bring canned food for the class drive," Noah said, trying to sound casual. "But I told her maybe next week." Emily closed the refrigerator a little too softly. "You can bring something. We have soup." "It is okay," he said quickly. "Other kids are bringing a lot." There it was again, that careful kindness that made him seem older than 8 and made Emily want to sit on the floor and apologize for every hard thing he had learned too early. Instead, she pulled out the soup can, held it up like a prize, and smiled. "Then ours will be the most heroic can in the box." Noah grinned, but only for a second. His gaze dropped to her hand where it rested against her chest. She had not realized she was doing it again, pressing her palm there whenever the tightness returned. She lowered her hand. "I am fine," she said before he could ask. Noah nodded, pretending to believe her because she needed him to, and that was another quiet cruelty of their life. After dinner, while Noah practiced spelling words at the table, Emily spread the bills beside the sink where he could not see them. Rent, electric, car insurance, school lunch balance, clinic notice. She wrote numbers on the back of an envelope, subtracted, crossed out, subtracted again. No version of the math produced mercy. Outside, rain tapped against the window in thin silver lines. Across the courtyard, in the yellow glow of apartment 2B, Thomas Whitaker stood at his own kitchen window, still in his gray sweater, holding a mug he had not drunk from. He could see Emily's silhouette move from counter to table and back again, always busy, always bracing herself. He saw Noah lift his spelling paper for her to check. He saw her smile for the boy, then turn away and grip the edge of the sink until the smile disappeared. Thomas had spent years perfecting the art of not interfering. He kept his mail sorted, his tools clean, his conversations short. He watered the same half-dead geranium every morning and told himself that solitude was not the same as punishment. But that evening, watching Emily Carter stand under the weak kitchen light with unpaid bills spread like a losing hand in front of her, he felt an old grief stir awake in his chest. It had a name, it had a face, and it had once called him Dad. The next morning arrived with the pale, reluctant light of a November sky that seemed just as tired as everyone beneath it. Emily woke before her alarm, not because she was rested, but because her body had developed the grim little habit of surfacing from sleep whenever worry got too loud. The radiator hissed. A garbage truck groaned somewhere down in the alley. Noah slept curled under his dinosaur blanket on the pull-out sofa, one arm thrown over his face, his spelling worksheet still tucked beneath a couch cushion. Emily stood in the kitchen in her socks, staring at the coffee maker as if caffeine were a financial plan. Her phone sat face down beside the sink, but the silence did not comfort her. Silence from Ryan Carter usually meant he was either avoiding responsibility or preparing a speech about how hard his life was, which was impressive considering how rarely his hardships involved buying groceries for his son. When the phone finally buzzed, Emily closed her eyes for 1 second before turning it over. Ryan's name filled the screen. She stepped into the narrow hallway outside the apartment so Noah would not hear. "Good morning," she said, keeping her voice low. "Did you send the child support?" There was a pause on the other end, followed by Ryan's practice sigh, the one he used when he wanted her to feel unreasonable for expecting the bare minimum. "Emily, I was going to text you. This month is complicated." She leaned her shoulder against the wall, suddenly colder than she had been a moment before. "Complicated how? Work has been slow. My check is delayed. I have expenses too, you know." Emily looked down at the worn carpet runner, at the faded pattern she had memorized during too many calls. Just like this one. Noah's school lunch account is low. His sneakers barely fit. Rent is due tomorrow. "You always make it sound like I do nothing," Ryan said, his voice sharpening with injured pride. "I am doing my best." Emily almost asked what his best looked like, because from where she stood, it looked suspiciously like absence wearing cologne. But she had learned that arguments with Ryan were rooms with no doors. You could walk in with facts and still leave apologizing for having needs. "When can you send it?" she asked. "Maybe next week. Maybe the week after. I cannot promise." Behind the thin wall, a neighbor's television murmured about morning traffic on Interstate 71. Emily pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose. "You are legally required to help support your son." Ryan laughed softly, not with humor, but with that old dismissive edge that used to make her shrink. "Do not start with legal threats, Em. You know I would help if I could." The call ended before she could answer. Not goodbye, not ask Noah how he is. Just a dead line and the faint reflection of her own face in the phone screen, pale, exhausted, still expected to be reasonable. Emily stood there until the stairwell door opened below and Thomas Whitaker appeared on the landing, carrying a brown paper bag in one hand and a small toolbox in the other. He stopped when he saw her. His eyes moved over her face, not intrusively, but carefully, the way someone reads weather before deciding whether to step outside. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Emily replied, straightening as if dignity could be restored by posture alone. Thomas lifted the toolbox slightly. "Your car coughed pretty hard yesterday when you pulled in. Thought I might check the battery before the cold gets worse." Emily blinked. "You noticed that?" "Hard not to." The whole parking lot noticed. It sounded like a lawn mower trying to apologize. Despite everything, a small laugh escaped her. It surprised them both. Then the laugh broke into something thinner, something dangerous, and Emily looked away quickly. Thomas did not comment. He simply shifted the paper bag in his hand. "Picked up too much bread at the market. They had a sale. I was going to leave some by your door." "Mr. Whitaker," she said, her voice tightening. "We are fine." The sentence came out too fast, too polished, the official anthem of people standing 1 inch from collapse. Thomas nodded slowly. "I did not say you were not." That annoyed her more than pity would have. Pity she knew how to refuse. Quiet understanding left no handle to grab. From inside the apartment, Noah called, "Mom, I cannot find my blue hoodie." Emily turned toward the door, relief and guilt mixing in her chest. "It is on the chair, baby." When she looked back, Thomas was already setting the bag gently beside the wall, not pushing it toward her, not making a ceremony of it. "Bread goes stale when people argue with it," he said. "Take it or toss it. I will still check the battery after breakfast." Then he continued down the hall, leaving Emily alone with the paper bag, the unpaid rent, the empty prescription, and the terrible tenderness of help she had not asked for but desperately needed. By 7:30, the sky over the apartment complex had settled into a flat pewter gray, the kind of color that made every building look older and every worry feel permanent. Emily packed Noah's lunch with 2 slices of toast, peanut butter spread thin enough to qualify as optimism, and one of the oranges Thomas had left in the paper bag. She had stood in the hallway for almost a full minute before bringing the bag inside, as if accepting bread and fruit required a moral hearing. Pride was a stubborn thing, especially when it was the only luxury left. Noah noticed the orange immediately. "We have oranges?" he asked, his face brightening in a way that made Emily feel both grateful and ashamed. "Mr. Whitaker bought too much," she said, tucking it beside his sandwich. Apparently bread and oranges are very aggressive when left alone. Noah smiled. "Pavement like black snakes." He had opened the hood without making a production of it, his movements slow and precise, as if fixing broken things required respect. "Morning, Noah," he said. "Morning, Mr. Tom," Noah replied, then looked at the car with grave concern. "Is it dying?" Thomas leaned back on his heels. "Not dying, just dramatic." Noah considered this and nodded, apparently satisfied that the car had a personality problem rather than a fatal one. Emily pulled her coat tighter. "You really do not have to do this." "I know," Thomas said, checking the battery terminals. "That is why it is called helping and not court-ordered labor." It was not quite a joke, but Noah laughed anyway. The school bus arrived in a sigh of brakes, yellow and damp under the morning light. "Step back out of respect." Emily's apology rose automatically, but Thomas closed the hood before she could speak. "Battery should hold for now. You may need a replacement before winter gets serious." "How much does that cost?" she asked, hating the fear that slipped into her voice. Thomas gave her a practical look. "More than anyone wants. Less than a funeral for an engine." She almost smiled, but the pressure in her chest returned, a dull tightening that made her breath catch. She turned slightly, pretending to search for her keys, but Thomas had already seen. "Emily," he said, quieter now. "For an elderly customer, sorted towels for a local gym, wiped spilled detergent from the counter, and smiled every time someone looked her way." Smiling had become part of the uniform. The tightness in her chest came and went, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a fist, but she kept working. She had 4 hours before she needed to pick Noah up from the after-school program, 6 hours before Mrs. Brooks expected rent, and no realistic plan except the old reliable strategy of pretending panic was a form of productivity. At noon, during her 15-minute break, Emily sat in the tiny back room with a paper cup of water and opened her banking app. $212. After gas, a school lunch payment, and the discounted groceries she had planned for tonight, she would have less than $140. Rent was $950. Her break ended. She returned to the front just as Mrs. Alvarez, a regular customer with 3 grandchildren and a talent for knowing everyone's business, leaned over the counter. "Honey, you look pale." Emily reached for a stack of dry cleaning slips. "Just tired?" asked, the words softer than she intended. Thomas looked toward the rain-streaked window, and for a moment his eyes seemed fixed on something much farther away than the parking lot. "Because sometimes," he said, "a person gets one chance to notice before it is too late." Then he turned and walked back into the rain to fix a small red light on the back of her failing car, leaving Emily with a basket of damp towels in her arms and the unsettling feeling that his kindness was not random at all. Pain relievers she did not need, but somehow resented for being affordable, while the medicine she did need waited behind a counter like a locked door. "Mom," Noah said, tugging her sleeve. "Are you okay?" She blinked and looked down at him. His face was tilted up, serious and too alert. The fluorescent lights made him look small, which was unfair, because life had already asked him to act large. "Just tired," she said. "Everyone is tired," he replied softly. That was not a child's answer. It was a verdict. At home, Emily cooked pasta while Noah worked on his multiplication tables. The apartment steamed up from the boiling water, and for a little while the kitchen felt warm enough to pretend things were manageable. She let Noah sprinkle dried Parmesan from the green can, and he acted like he was a chef on television, which made her laugh for the first time all day. Then, halfway through rinsing the pot, the pain returned. Not sharp, not dramatic, nothing anyone could point to and call an emergency. Just a deep pressure, a tightening under her ribs, followed by a dizziness that made the sink tilt strangely beneath her hands. She gripped the counter and closed her eyes. "Mom." Noah's chair scraped the floor. Emily forced air into her lungs. "I am fine, baby. You are doing the thing again." "What thing?" "The thing where you say you are fine but your face says you are lying." There it was, the terrible accuracy of a child raised around adult disappointments. Emily turned off the faucet and tried to smile, but the room shifted at the edges. She lowered herself carefully onto the kitchen floor before her legs could decide for her. Noah was beside her instantly, his small hands hovering because he did not know where to touch without making something worse. "Should I call Dad?" he asked, though the doubt in his voice said he already knew the answer. Emily shook her head. "No, just give me a minute." Noah disappeared into the living room and returned with the blue fleece blanket from the sofa. He draped it over her shoulders with solemn concentration, then sat beside her on the linoleum, close enough that his knee touched hers. "I can stay home from school tomorrow," he said. "No, you cannot. I can help. You already help too much." Her voice cracked on the last word. Noah looked down at his hands, and Emily hated herself a little for letting him see the truth leak out. Across the hall, beyond the apartment door, the building was quiet except for the faint creak of old pipes and the distant murmur of someone's television. Emily leaned her head back against the cabinet, breathing slowly, pretending the medication she had left at the pharmacy was not sitting in her mind like an accusation. Noah reached for her hand. His fingers were warm and sticky from dinner. "Mr. Tom said quiet can still be nice," he whispered. Emily looked at him, startled. "When did he say that?" "He did not. I said it, but I think he thinks it." Despite the ache in her chest, Emily gave a weak laugh. Then she heard footsteps pause outside their door. One set, slow and familiar. A shadow shifted beneath the frame, then remained still. Thomas Whitaker did not knock. He did not intrude. He simply stood on the other side of the door long enough to hear Noah ask, in a voice no child should have to use, "Mom, what happens if you get too sick?" And in the hallway, unseen by them both, Thomas closed his eyes as the past he had tried to bury rose up and breathed his daughter's name. The next morning, Emily woke on the couch with the blue blanket around her shoulders and Noah's small hand still tucked inside hers. Sometime after the dizziness faded, she must have convinced him to sleep beside her instead of worrying at the kitchen table, because his dinosaur blanket was half on the floor and his cheek was pressed against the sleeve of her sweater. The apartment was dim and cold, the window pale with early light, and for one gentle second Emily allowed herself to pretend she had simply fallen asleep during a movie, that there were not bills on the counter, an empty prescription waiting in her purse, and a deadline from Mrs. Brooks moving toward her with the enthusiasm of a tax collector in comfortable shoes. Then Noah stirred, blinking up at her. "Are you better?" he asked. Emily smiled because mothers have been smiling through disasters since the beginning of civilization, which says less about strength and more about civilization needing serious repairs. "I am better enough to make oatmeal." That is not a real answer. It is the only answer the kitchen can afford. He did not laugh, and that worried her more than if he had cried. After breakfast, she walked him to the bus stop with careful steps, keeping one hand in her coat pocket around her phone in case the school called, in case Ryan called, in case the entire world decided to ask for one more thing before 9 in the morning. Thomas was on his balcony below, watering the same tired geranium that looked as if it had lost the will to participate in photosynthesis. He raised a hand to Noah, but did not call out. Noah waved back with both hands, then climbed onto the bus. When Emily returned upstairs, a folded note was taped to her door. For one heart-stopping moment, she thought it was another rent warning. Instead, the paper held Thomas's neat, old-fashioned handwriting. "Sink in 3C sounded like it was dripping last night. I can fix it today if you want. No charge. No pressure." Emily stared at the words for a long time. No pressure. That was the part that undid her a little. People always said no pressure right before applying some. Thomas seemed to mean it, which made the kindness more dangerous. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, deciding she would ignore the note until the dripping became dramatic enough to require witnesses. But at 10:15, while she was getting ready for her second shift at the laundromat, the kitchen pipe gave a small metallic cough and sent a thin spray of water into the cabinet below the sink. Emily stared at it, then at the ceiling, as if the universe might enjoy being glared at for once. 20 minutes later, Thomas stood in her kitchen with his toolbox open beside him, sleeves rolled to his elbows, working beneath the sink with quiet competence. Emily hovered nearby, embarrassed by the worn towels on the counter, the unpaid bills tucked badly under a grocery flyer, the evidence of a life always one gust away from scattering. "You do not have to stand guard," Thomas said from under the sink. "The pipe and I are reaching in. Understanding. I just do not like people doing things for me. Most people do not. They prefer collapsing independently. Very American." She almost smiled, then busied herself clearing dishes from the table. As she lifted a mug, her sleeve caught the edge of the trash can and tipped it sideways. A few papers slid out, along with the empty orange prescription bottle she had brought home weeks ago and kept forgetting to throw away. It rolled across the linoleum and stopped against Thomas's toolbox. The room went still. Thomas came out from beneath the sink slowly, his gaze fixed on the bottle. He did not pick it up at first. He just looked at it, and something in his face changed from quiet concern to a grief so sudden and private that Emily felt as if she had opened a door without knocking. "That is old," she said too quickly. "I am getting it refilled." Thomas picked up the bottle and read the label. His thumb rested near the date. This was filled almost 6 weeks ago. Emily reached for it, but he did not hand it back immediately. "Mr. Whitaker." "Thomas," he said softly. "Please." The gentleness made her defensive. "I said I am handling it." He looked at her then, and his eyes were not stern, not accusing, only tired in a way that seemed older than his years. "I believe you were trying to." Emily took the bottle from his hand and dropped it into the trash. "There is a difference." "There is," he said, "and that difference can become a hospital bill." She turned away, but her silence had already answered more than she meant it to. Thomas finished the pipe, wiped the cabinet dry, and left without another word about the medicine. That should have relieved her. It did not. An hour later, from his own apartment, Thomas sat at his small kitchen table with a phone book, a notepad, and the kind of resolve that arrives only after regret has lived in a person too long. He called the community clinic on West Broad Street and asked about prescription assistance, sliding scale appointments, transportation vouchers, and emergency refills. His voice was calm, but his hand shook as he wrote down every number. When the woman on the phone asked whether he was calling for a family member, Thomas looked at the framed photograph on his windowsill, a young woman with his eyes and a laughing smile frozen in summer light. "No," he said after a moment. "Not family." Then he looked toward the ceiling, toward apartment 3C, where a mother was trying to outrun illness with grocery money and pride. But close enough. By late afternoon, the apartment felt smaller than usual, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. Emily had gone to work after Thomas fixed the sink, then returned home with her body aching in that quiet, persistent way she refused to name. Noah was at the kitchen table drawing a map for social studies, carefully coloring Ohio in blue because, as he explained, gray felt too sad. Emily was slicing apples beside him when there was a soft knock at the door. Not Mrs. Brooks's sharp, businesslike knock. Not a delivery. This one was hesitant, almost apologetic. Emily wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened it to find Thomas standing in the hallway with his cap in one hand and a folded sheet of paper in the other. He looked uncomfortable, which was impressive for a man who usually wore discomfort like a second coat. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Emily's eyes moved to the paper. "If this is about the sink, I will pay you when I can." "It is not about the sink." His voice was calm, but something in it made her tighten her grip on the door. "Then what is it?" Thomas looked past her just long enough to see Noah at the table. "Maybe in the hall." Emily stepped out and pulled the door mostly closed behind her. The corridor smelled of old paint and someone reheating pizza downstairs. Thomas held out the paper. "The community clinic on West Broad has a prescription assistance program. They can see you tomorrow morning at 9. They said to bring identification, proof of income if you have it, and the prescription bottle." For a second, Emily did not understand the words. They sounded practical, ordinary, almost harmless. Then meaning rushed in, hot and humiliating. "You called a clinic for me?" Thomas did not flinch. "I called to ask what options exist." "For me?" "Yes." Emily felt her face burn. "You had no right." "I know. No, I do. Not think you do know." Her voice rose, then dropped when she remembered Noah on the other side of the door. "You saw one empty bottle and decided I needed saving?" Thomas's expression remained still, but his eyes lowered. "I decided you deserved information. Do not dress this up as information. This is pity." "It is not." "Then what is it?" she demanded. "Because from where I am standing, it looks like an old man with too much time deciding the struggling single mother down the hall is his little charity project." The words came out sharper than she intended, but once they were in the hallway, she could not pull them back. Thomas absorbed them in silence. Somewhere below, a door opened and closed. A pipe clicked in the wall. The building, old and nosy, seemed to hold its breath. Finally Thomas said, "You are not a project. Then stop acting like I am helpless." "I do not think you are helpless. You keep showing up with food, tools, phone numbers. What do you call that?" He looked at her then, and for the first time since she had known him, the quiet in him cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, Just enough for grief to show through. I call it recognizing someone who is doing the math wrong because she thinks her life costs less than everyone else's comfort. Emily went still. The sentence struck too close, so close it felt almost invasive. You do not know anything about my life. No, Thomas said. But I know what it looks like when someone tells herself she can wait one more day, skip one more dose, carry one more bill, hide one more symptom, because there is a child in the next room and rent is due and pride is the last thing no one has taken yet. Emily stared at him. The anger in her chest faltered, replaced by something more frightening, recognition. Why do you care so much? She asked. Thomas's mouth tightened. For a moment, she thought he would finally answer. Instead, he looked toward the floor, where a thin line of light spilled from under her door. Noah's pencil scratched faintly against paper inside. Because I have seen this story before, Thomas said, and I did not like the ending. Emily's throat closed. The paper in his hand trembled. Slightly, though his voice stayed even. You do not have to take my help. You do not have to tell me anything. But keep the appointment. Or do not. That choice is yours. He placed the folded paper on the small table beside the hallway mail basket, careful not to put it in her hand, careful not to turn kindness into a command. Then he stepped back toward the stairs. Emily stood there, shaking with anger she no longer fully believed in, watching him leave. When she went back inside, Noah looked up from his map. Was Mr. Tom mad? Emily closed the door slowly and leaned against it. The clinic paper felt heavier than it should have. Waiting in the hallway like a door she was terrified to open. No, she said softly. I think he was sad. Noah considered that, then returned to coloring Ohio blue. Emily crossed the room, sat at the kitchen table, and pressed both hands around a glass of water. For the first time in months, there was a path in front of her that did not begin with pretending. Naturally, because human survival likes to be dramatic, that terrified her more than having no path at all. The clinic paper stayed on the kitchen table all night, folded once down the middle like a secret that had not decided whether it wanted to become hope. Emily passed it while packing Noah's backpack, passed it while rinsing bowls, passed it again after he fell asleep with a library book open on his chest. Each time, she told herself she would decide in the morning, because postponing difficult choices was apparently the official sport of adulthood. But morning arrived carrying no mercy. Only a hard white envelope slipped under the apartment door. Emily saw it before Noah did. The paper lay on the worn carpet just inside the threshold, official and flat and cruelly neat. Her name was printed across the front in Mrs. Brooks's careful block letters. Emily picked it up with fingers that already knew what it was. Final notice. 72 hours to pay the full balance or vacate. The words did not shout. They did not need to. They sat on the page with the calm authority of a locked door. Emily stood in the hallway light, wearing yesterday's sweater, her hair pulled back too tightly, and felt the floor tilt in a way that had nothing to do with illness. She had been afraid of this moment for so long that when it finally came, there was almost a strange quiet to it, like the sound after a glass breaks and before anyone moves. Mom. Noah's voice came from the living room. She folded the notice quickly and tucked it behind the electric bill on the counter. Just mail, she said, and hated how easily the lie came now, like a reflex trained by poverty. Noah appeared with one sneaker on and one in his hand. Is it bad mail? Emily forced a smile. There is no good mail anymore. That is why people invented email, so bad news could travel faster. He did not laugh. He only watched her face, searching for the truth she was trying to hide from a child who had become far too good at finding it. Before he could ask again, her phone rang. Ryan Carter. Emily stared at his name and felt a cold, familiar anger rise through the fog of fear. She answered in the kitchen, turning away from Noah. Did you send the money? She asked. Good morning to you too, Ryan said, with that lazy offense he wore whenever responsibility interrupted his comfort. I'm calling about this weekend. Emily closed her eyes. What about this weekend? Marissa wants to meet Noah properly. We were thinking I could take him Saturday. Maybe keep him overnight. For a moment, Emily thought she had misheard. The apartment seemed to go very still around her. You cannot send child support, but you can plan a family weekend with your girlfriend? Ryan sighed. Do not make this ugly. Noah is my son too. Then help support him. I told you money is tight. Emily looked at the folded eviction notice hidden behind the electric bill, then at the small orange sitting beside Noah's lunchbox, a gift from a neighbor because his own father had decided fatherhood was apparently a seasonal position. Money is tight for everyone, she said. But you were at a restaurant 2 days ago. Silence. Then Ryan's voice hardened. So now you are stalking my social media? No. I am watching you live comfortably while your son needs shoes. Noah stood in the doorway now, one sneaker still in his hand. Emily saw him and lowered her voice, but it was too late. His eyes had sharpened with the terrible understanding children should not have to carry. Ryan kept talking. Emily, I am trying to be present. You always act like I am the villain. Being present for pictures is not the same as being present for a child. You know what? Maybe I should talk to a lawyer about more time with him. Maybe if Noah were with me more, things would be less chaotic. The sentence moved through Emily like ice. Not because she believed Ryan wanted custody, but because she knew he wanted control. Control was cheaper than child support and easier than love. Do not use him to punish me, she said. I am not punishing anyone. Then send the money you owe. Ryan scoffed. I will see what I can do. That is what you always say. The call ended with no promise, no apology, no question about Noah's cough, his homework, his favorite dinosaur, his fear when his mother sat on the kitchen floor trying to breathe. Emily lowered the phone slowly. Noah's voice was small behind her. If Dad has money to go to dinner, why does he not have money for me? There it was. The question she had spent years trying to protect him from, standing in their kitchen wearing mismatched socks and holding one worn-out sneaker. Emily knelt in front of him, and the movement sent a wave of dizziness through her, but she steadied herself against the cabinet. That is not because of you, she said firmly. Do you hear me? Adults make choices, and his choices are not your fault. Noah looked down at the sneaker in his hands. Are we going to have to leave? Emily's throat tightened. She had not told him about the notice. She had not needed to. Children in unstable homes learn to read paper the way sailors read clouds. Before she could answer, a soft knock came at the door. Emily froze. Noah looked toward it. Another knock, gentle but certain. When she opened the door, Thomas stood there holding the clinic paper she had left on the hall table the night before, now tucked inside a plain manila folder with bus directions, appointment details, and a list written in his careful hand. His gaze moved from Emily's pale face to Noah's single sneaker, then to the corner of the eviction notice visible on the counter behind her. He did not ask what had happened. He did not need to. The appointment is in 40 minutes, he said quietly. I warmed up the truck. Emily gripped the doorframe, pride and fear wrestling inside her like two exhausted animals. Thomas looked at her, not as a rescuer, not as a judge, but as someone who had finally decided that silence was no longer kindness. You can be angry at me in the passenger seat, he said, but you are not missing that appointment. Emily did not answer immediately. She stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame, Noah behind her in mismatched socks, Thomas in the hall with his manila folder and his quiet, stubborn face. Pride rose first, because pride was fast and familiar. It told her to say no, to shut the door, to prove she could handle one more impossible morning by herself. But then Noah shifted behind her, and the worn sole of his sneaker made a soft scraping sound against the floor. That tiny sound did what Ryan's excuses, Mrs. Brooks's notice, and her own aching body had not managed to do. It broke through the last fragile wall of denial. Emily looked down at her son's shoe, at the place where the rubber had started to peel away near the toe, and suddenly the whole performance felt unbearable. Get your jacket, she told Noah, her voice rough. Noah blinked. Am I coming too? Yes, Thomas said gently before Emily could invent another plan that would cost her more energy than it saved. There is a waiting room. I brought a book from my shelf. It has trains in it. Noah looked at Emily for permission. She nodded. 10 minutes later, they were in Thomas's old blue Ford pickup, the kind with a bench seat, a cracked dashboard, and a heater that worked like it had strong opinions about labor rights. Noah sat in the middle with the train book open on his lap, though he was not really reading. Emily sat by the passenger door, clutching her purse so tightly that the fake leather creased under her fingers. The city moved past in wet gray pieces, bus stops, gas stations, a church with a sign about gratitude, a payday loan, storefront with balloons taped to the window, because apparently financial traps also enjoyed festive decor. Thomas drove carefully, both hands on the wheel, saying nothing unless the road required it. That silence should have felt awkward. Instead, it gave Emily room to be angry without having to explain the anger, scared without having to apologize for it. At a red light, Noah turned a page and whispered, "Mom, is the doctor going to make you better?" Emily opened her mouth, but the truth was too large and the lie was too tired. Thomas answered without looking away from the road. Doctors help people make a plan. Plans are useful. They keep fear from running the meeting. Noah considered this with the seriousness of a small judge. Fear is bad at meetings. Terrible, Thomas said. Always interrupts. Emily let out a breath that was almost a laugh, and for a moment the tightness in her chest loosened. The West Broad Community Clinic sat in a low brick building between a dental office and a small food pantry. Inside, the waiting room was bright but worn, with vinyl chairs, a television on mute, and posters about blood pressure, flu shots, and nutrition programs. Emily had expected judgment. She had prepared for it like armor. But the receptionist only smiled, asked for her name, and handed her forms on a clipboard. Normal kindness, Emily discovered, could be more disorienting than cruelty. Cruelty at least confirmed what fear had already rehearsed. Kindness required adjustment. She filled out the paperwork while Noah read beside her and Thomas stood near the window, giving her privacy without abandoning her. When the nurse called her name, Emily stood too quickly and swayed. Thomas stepped forward, but stopped himself before touching her. The restraint nearly undid her. "I am okay," she said automatically. The nurse, a woman named Carla with silver-streaked braids and bright purple glasses, gave her a look that had probably ended thousands of patient lives. "We will let the blood pressure cuff vote on that." In the exam room, the numbers were higher than they should have been, and the questions were more serious than Emily wanted them to be. Had she missed doses? How long had the chest pressure been happening? Was she under stress? Emily almost laughed at that one. Under stress sounded so tidy, like stress was a throw blanket she had chosen for the sofa instead of a ceiling slowly lowering over her life. She answered carefully, ashamed at first, then less ashamed as Carla kept nodding without making her feel small. The doctor came in, reviewed her chart, adjusted her medication plan, and explained that the clinic could enroll her in a prescription assistance program that day. The refill would cost $12. 12. Emily stared at the number printed on the form until her eyes stung. She had been risking her health over $175 that a better system had hidden behind the right phone call. In the waiting room, Noah looked up when she came out. Did they help? Emily knelt in front of him, the manila folder tucked under her arm, her new appointment card inside it, her prescription finally reachable. "They helped," she said. Her voice shook, but this time she did not hide it. Noah wrapped his arms around her neck. Over his shoulder, Emily saw Thomas looking out the window, one hand pressed against the sill, his face turned away. She understood then that this had never been only about her. Outside, rain slid down the glass, blurring the parking lot into watercolor. Inside, for the first time in a long time, Emily held proof that survival did not have to be a private project. They left the clinic with a white paper bag from the dispensary, a follow-up appointment card, and a kind of silence Emily did not know how to name. It was not comfortable, exactly. Comfort still felt too expensive to trust. But it was quieter than fear, and for the first time in weeks, her body seemed to understand that help had arrived before disaster, not after. Thomas drove them back through the rain-washed streets, past the food pantry, the shuttered tax office, the gas station sign blinking $3.49 a gallon, past all the ordinary American landmarks of people trying to survive politely while the bills stacked up like rude little monuments. Noah sat in the middle again, holding the train, book against his chest, but his eyes kept drifting to the paper bag in Emily's lap. "That is the medicine?" he asked. "That is the medicine," Emily said. "And it was only $12? $12. Noah thought about this with visible outrage, because children are very good at noticing when adult systems are ridiculous and very bad at pretending otherwise. Then why did the other place say it was so much? Emily looked out the window. Because sometimes you have to know which door to knock on. Thomas's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "And sometimes," he said, "someone should tell you where the door is before you are standing outside in the cold." Emily turned toward him. His voice had changed, not much, but enough. The words carried something old beneath them. Noah did not notice. He had returned to the train book. Emily did. When they reached the apartment complex, Thomas parked near the entrance and shut off the engine. Rain ticked softly against the roof of the truck. For a moment, none of them moved. Then Thomas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small photograph, worn at the edges, the kind people keep not because it is perfect, but because it is all they can still touch. He held it between both hands before passing it to Emily. A young woman smiled from the picture, standing in summer sunlight beside a little girl with pigtails. The woman had Thomas's eyes, clear and steady, but her smile was brighter, open in a way his had probably been before grief taught it to close. Her name was Lily, he said. Emily looked at the photograph, then at him. Noah grew still beside them, sensing the shift even if he did not understand it. Thomas stared through the windshield at the blurred shape of the building. She was my daughter. She was 29. Her little girl, Anna, was 4. His voice stayed even, but the effort it cost him was visible in the lines around his mouth. Lily was stubborn, smart, proud in the way people get when they have had to prove they are not a burden. Her husband left when Anna was 2. Not all at once, naturally. People like that prefer to disappear in installments. A missed payment here, a canceled weekend there, promises scattered around like coupons nobody can redeem. Emily's throat tightened. The description fit Ryan so closely it felt borrowed from her own kitchen. She worked at a daycare during the day and cleaned offices at night. Thomas continued. She had asthma and a heart condition that needed medication. Nothing dramatic at first. Manageable, the doctors said. Manageable is a word people use when they assume money is also manageable. He gave a faint, humorless breath. She kept telling me she was fine. I believed her because I wanted to. Because believing someone is fine is easier than admitting they are drowning while standing right in front of you. Emily looked down at the photo again. Lily's smile seemed almost painfully alive. One winter, she got behind on rent. Anna needed a coat. The car needed repairs. Her medication refill was expensive. She chose everything else first. Thomas paused, and the rain filled the truck with a soft, merciful sound. By the time she called me, she was already in the emergency room. She kept apologizing. Can you imagine that? My child was scared, sick, exhausted, and apologizing because she thought needing help was a failure. Emily pressed her hand over the medicine bag in her lap. She could feel the shape of the bottle through the paper. I am sorry, she whispered. The words were small, useless, human, which meant they were all she had. Thomas nodded once, but his eyes stayed on the windshield. Anna lives with her aunt in Michigan now. Good family. Better schools. I visit when I can. But every morning I water that ugly geranium, because Lily gave it to me the week before she died. She said it looked pathetic and deserved a second chance. Noah leaned forward slightly. That is why you keep watering it. Thomas looked at him then, and something softened. Yes. Noah considered this, then said, it is not ugly. It is just having a hard time. For the first time, Thomas smiled, and it nearly broke Emily's heart. The smile was small, brief, and full of a love that had nowhere easy to go. Emily handed the photograph back with careful fingers. You were not trying to save me, she said softly. Thomas slid the picture into his coat pocket. No, I was trying not to ignore what I recognized. She looked toward the apartment building, toward the third-floor window where their unpaid rent notice waited on the counter. The problems had not vanished. Rent was still due. Ryan was still Ryan, a disappointing little weather pattern with a phone plan. Her car still needed a battery. Her life was still fragile. But something had shifted. The fear was no longer sealed inside her alone. I do not know how to accept this, she admitted. Thomas opened his door, letting in a rush of cold air. Then do not accept all of it today. Start with taking the medicine. Noah picked up the white paper bag and held it out to her with both hands, solemn as a nurse, fierce as a son. Emily took it, and this time, she did not apologize. Emily took the first dose before she let herself think too much about it, because thinking had become the place where fear liked to hold meetings and overstay its welcome. She stood at the kitchen sink, swallowed the pill with tap water from a chipped blue mug, and felt Noah watching her with the solemn attention of someone witnessing a promise. Thomas had carried the grocery bag upstairs, left it by the door, and retreated to his apartment without making a speech, which Emily appreciated more than she knew how to say. The white paper bag from the clinic sat on the counter beside the eviction notice, two symbols of her life arranged like a cruel little still life. One proof that help existed, one proof that consequences did too. Noah touched the edge of the notice with one finger. Was not a perfect answer, but it was honest, and honesty, Emily was discovering, did not always have to be a weapon. Sometimes it could be a lamp. That evening, after Noah fell asleep, she spread everything across the kitchen table. Pay stubs, rent notices, clinic forms, Ryan's missed child support records, old bank statements, and the notebook where she tracked every dollar with the precision of someone defusing a bomb made of groceries and late fees. At 8:15, there was a knock. Thomas stood outside with 2 cups of tea from his apartment and a folder tucked under his arm. "I am not here to take over," he said before she could brace herself. "I am here to sit at the table while you make calls." Emily looked at him for a long second, then stepped aside. "You brought a folder." "I am retired. Folders are how old men pretend they still have authority." This time, she laughed, quietly but genuinely. "Read the papers slowly." Her face did not soften much, but it shifted. They had survived out of pure irritation. Noah noticed them first on a Saturday morning while carrying a cardboard box of canned goods down the stairs for the school pantry drive. "Mr. Tom," he called, stopping so suddenly Emily nearly bumped into him. "Your plant did it." Thomas looked up from the bench near the entrance, where he had been tightening a screw on Mrs. Brooks's mailbox because retirement had apparently turned him into the building's unofficial department of things that squeaked. He followed Noah's pointing finger to the balcony and went very still. Homework under fluorescent lights while dryers thundered around him like industrial weather. Their apartment was still small. The radiator still clanged. The Honda still complained on cold mornings, though Thomas had found a refurbished battery through a friend who ran an auto shop. Kitchen table, while you learned how to ask for help without apologizing for breathing.